This is the Philippines, and this country has three major islands, which are called Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao, or Luz Viminda, as they always say. But through the years, Mindanao has become the subject of the idea of separation. And now the Philippines might become an even smaller country if that happens. Well, is that really possible? Does Mindanao have a chance to become an independent island? And what will happen if they actually separate from the Philippine government? Will it affect the economy of the country and make the Philippines poorer? Well, welcome to Grand Line Media. To understand the whole point of this documentary, let's first talk about when this idea of separation happened. And why do some people in Mindanao want to become independent? It all started during the American colonial period in the Philippines. You see, when the United States took over the country from the Spanish Empire, they promised that they would decolonize the island and grant the Philippines full independence. But not all parts of the country are happy about it, and the Moro leaders are one of those people who don't want their territories to be included in the future Philippine state, meaning they don't want to serve under the umbrella of the Philippine state. Obviously, they failed because, until now, Mindanao is still included in this country's territory. But recently, some events suggest that the idea of Mindanao being separated is not dead yet. In fact, even the former president, Rodrigo Duterte, suggests that Mindanao should really become independent. Anyway, making it happen is quite difficult, but not impossible, because it happened already in some other countries. But again, it is difficult. Many government officials are against it, and many Filipinos don't want to separate Mindanao from its motherland. But even if they want it, it's not easy. It needs a lot of work to make it happen. But let's just say it happens. When Mindanao finally becomes an independent island, what will happen next? Well, this case is not really uncommon. It happened already in some other countries around the world, where one country was divided into two. The best example was Korea. Now they have South Korea and North Korea. Obviously, today, the North and South have different governments. South Korea became a republican country where they're exercising the freedom of vote to select officials, while North Korea remains a dictatorship country. So now, when Mindanao is separated, the Philippines will become two countries. Possibly they will call it the North Philippines and the South Philippines. Mindanao will be the South, and Luzon and Visayas will be the North. The North Philippines, of course, will remain a republican country and still exercise its freedom of democracy. But what about Mindanao, which is now the South Philippines? Well, they might continue being a republican government, but there is always a possibility that they will turn into a communist country like China, Cuba, Laos, North Korea, and Vietnam. You see, the people in Mindanao who want this separation are the Moro National Liberation Front, the Moro Islamic Liberation Front, the Bangsamoro Islamic Freedom Fighters, and the Abu Sayyaf. What they all want from the very beginning is to separate Mindanao, including the Sulu Archipelago and Palawan, from the Philippines. Now, as you notice, they are all Islamic groups. And the reason they wanted to separate their land from the Philippine government was because they wanted to make their own government. They have their own leaders, and they have their own army. It means they don't have to rely on the Philippine government anymore, and they can build their own. And there is a possibility that they will build a communist government. After all, these groups of people want to rule themselves, right? And perhaps they will not allow any voting from its community to select their leaders. Well, that was just one possible scenario that could happen. But of course, the citizens of Mindanao will obviously not agree to have a communist government because everyone loves democracy.
Democracy!
So the South Philippines might remain republican, but these Islamic groups will oppose it and continue their movement even though they are already separated. And that will be hard for the South, especially for the newly built country. Anyway, enough with that. Let's talk about what will happen to the Philippine economy and also to the Mindanao economy. This, I guess, will be the crucial part of the separation of Mindanao, especially for the Philippine economy itself. You see, Mindanao currently accounts for 15% of the country's GDP and 40% of agricultural production. And it will be a huge loss for the country if Mindanao separates. The loss of 40% of agricultural production will have a significant impact on the Philippines' economy. And for a developing country like the Philippines, it will be a huge risk. But not for Mindanao, you know. When Mindanao becomes independent, they will have a chance to grow their economy on their own. And having a small land to govern it is much easier than having a big one. The best example of this case is Singapore. In one of our documentary about Singapore, I mentioned that Singapore started to become a rich country when they separated from Malaysia. And one great reason for that is that they became a small nation and were able to give their full attention to all problems that needed to be addressed. And now, Singapore has become one of the most world-class countries in the world. Anyway, it could also be the same case in the North Philippines. Even though they lost 40% of their agricultural contribution from Mindanao, they might recover fast since they became a smaller nation as well. Since they will only have Luzon and Visayas to govern with, perhaps their government officials can now resolve problems faster, only if they are not corrupt. Again, it will still depend on government officials in the country. Well, this issue of the potential separation of Mindanao might not happen. After all, many people are against it. And the president of this country, Ferdinand Marcos Jr., obviously showed that he doesn't like the idea of Mindanao being separated from the Philippine state. This issue was only brought up again because former President Rodrigo Duterte brought it up during his latest speech, and people believe that it was just part of his quarrel with President Marcos. Anyway, the Philippines are Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao, and through the years, these three regions have helped each other grow, and removing one of them is like removing one limb from the body of a person, and I do think most Filipinos didn't want that to happen.